Imagine signing a multi-million-dollar record deal, recording your hair metal debut with a legendary producer, being touted as Capitol Records' next big glam act, and then... For a band that seemed to do everything right, Wildside became one of rock's biggest what-ifs. This is not the story of a bad band. That was Brent Woods, lead guitarist for Wildside. Wildside weren't another generic Sunset Strip band trying to copy Poison or Cinderella. These guys had massive hooks, nasty riffs, power ballads, and a guitarist who deserved to be mentioned alongside some of the most tasteful players coming out of the Sunset Strip. But before Brent Woods became one of the most overlooked guitarists of the late hair metal era, Wildside had to survive that same grind as every other band did when they were chasing that Sunset Strip dream. Ironically, their story begins in the city that would eventually help kill hair metal. When vocalist Drew Rose, aka Drew Hanna, and guitarist Benny Reinvents were coming up there in the mid-80s, they were playing in a group called Rogue. Seattle simply wasn't where aspiring glam bands went to get discovered. If you wanted labels, managers, and a shot at the big time, Hollywood was where you went. So, in '86, they packed up and headed south to Hollywood and entered the same brutal proving ground as every other aspiring band on the Sunset Strip, and surviving the same pay-to-play system where hundreds of bands were all competing for their shot at being the next Motley Crue. The band reemerged as Young Guns, featuring Drew Hanna on vocals, Benny Reinvents and Brent Woods on guitars, Mark Simon on bass, and Jimmy D behind the kit. And this is where the band's lineup started to become something special. Brent Woods had already built a reputation in the local scene with bands like Alrisha, but when he joined Young Guns, the band's guitar department suddenly became a major strength. Something clicked. See what I mean? In his overall playing, I hear a super heavy grip, comparable to someone like John Sykes, aggressive double stops, hard pinch harmonics, and deep vibrato. In his leads, I hear some Warren DeMartini slippery phrasing inspiration. What's interesting is Brent wasn't carrying the band alone. It was the collective chemistry. Benny Reinvents wrote much of the material and helped finish lyrics when the band got stuck. Anyway, after years of grinding on the Strip, the band finally caught the attention of an entertainment attorney who believed they were ready for the big leagues. Before long, a bidding war started. A band that had spent years grinding in clubs was suddenly one of the hottest unsigned acts on the Strip. Capitol Records ultimately won the battle and signed Young Guns to what was reportedly a multi-million-dollar deal. and the expectations weren't just coming from the label. The band had serious names from the rock world involved in the project, including contributions from people like Paul Stanley. Just one problem: the name.
The law. You're being hunted by troops.
We're good, but this is getting...
The film's rights holders objected to the band's name and reportedly demanded a significant payment to allow them to keep it. Rather than fight a legal battle before their debut had even released, the band decided to move on. Lo and behold, we get Wildside. So with that resolved, they started collaborating with a producer who had already helped shape some of the biggest rock albums of the era, Andy Johns. On top of that, they recorded their debut album, Under the Influence, at 5150 Studios. Yep, Ed Van Halen's personal home studio. At the time, 5150 was still a relatively exclusive environment, and Wildside became one of the early outside bands to record there. On paper, everything was literally perfect for these guys. Wildside had spent years developing this material, playing these songs on the Strip, refining their sound, and building the foundation that would eventually become Under the Influence. But the road from signing to releasing that album took longer than anyone probably expected. And when the album finally arrived in '92, you already know what else was happening in rock music. Now, it's easy to look back and say, well, grunge killed hair metal, and that's that. But that's not the whole story. Because even in the early '90s, there were still bands from this scene finding success. Firehouse, Warrant, Slaughter, Extreme, Mr. Big, Danger Danger. The difference is those bands either had a major crossover single, strong label support, or enough momentum to break through despite the changing landscape. Wildside had the songs. They had the musicianship. What they didn't have was the perfect storm of timing, promotion, and that one-hit single that forced everyone to pay attention. And honestly, that's what makes their story so frustrating. Because to me, Hang On Lucy sounds like it could have been that song. It has the catchy hook, has the attitude, has the riff. It feels like that song that could have been that major radio or MTV hit a couple years earlier. The people who had fought to get them signed were no longer in the same positions, the promotional push never reached the level the band needed, and the momentum disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. One of the most promising bands from the final days of the Sunset Strip era was left with one question: what if? While Wildside never reached the level many expected, Brent Woods' story was far from over. Not long after the debut album's release, Brent moved on from Wildside, eventually joining Vince Neil's solo band and contributing to the 1995 album Carved in Stone. From there, Brent continued working alongside major names from the same hard rock world he came up in, including Sebastian Bach and Warrant. And that's the interesting irony of Brent Woods' career. The guitarist who never got his own massive breakout moment was still the guitarist other established artists wanted in their corner. Meanwhile, the rest of Wildside was trying to survive in a completely different musical landscape. The band attempted to reinvent themselves, moving away from the polished hooks and dual guitar attack that initially defined Under the Influence. Benny Reinvents disagreed with the new direction and eventually parted ways as well. Without Brent and Benny, the two guitarists who helped shape the debut's identity, Wildside released their self-titled album in '95, embracing the darker, heavier alternative sound that dominated rock at the time. And while I think their grunge era material stands out on its own as a solid album, it wasn't the Wildside their fans had fallen in love with. It also highlighted the impossible position they were in. The sound that made Wildside special was the exact sound the industry had already moved away from. After that, the story quietly faded into the background. But time has a funny way of changing perspectives. In 2020, fans got a particularly interesting piece of Wildside history with the release of formerly known as Young Guns, a collection of demos and early recordings from the band's pre-Capitol days, before the pressure to adapt, and before their window started closing. Old fans were reminded why they had championed these guys, while new listeners were finally discovering one of the hidden gems of the Sunset Strip era. And maybe that's the silver lining to Wildside's story. Decades later, people are still discovering a band that never got the opportunity it deserved. You can listen to Under the Influence today and hear a band that was ready. The songs were there, the players were there. The only thing missing was the one thing that no musician can control: timing.